we are moving on to everybody's favorite topic, critical reading. I'm sure you are overjoyed that you get to focus on critical reading for an entire section. So in 2005, when they changed the SAT, they added even more reading to the section to make your lives even more joyous. I know I love reading, and I know I loved the critical reading section when I was in high school. That's a total lie. It was really, my abomination of a section. I hated it. But it's actually not that bad when you come down to it. If you really work through what it is that they're asking and the types of questions that repeat themselves over and over and over again, you can really master this section pretty easily, but it's going to take some practice. This section, I have to say, is definitely the one section that takes the longest to improve. So if your test is next week or in 2 weeks, this is not the section that you want to be focusing on, because critical reading takes lots of practice. It's not something like math where if you learn the concept, you own it, you remember it, and then you use it on your test, you're automatically going to go up. Critical reading, you have to just keep doing practice sections over and over until you have all of these techniques down. So what we're going to go over today is some of the ways that you can always make sure that you're going to get the correct answer. So the first part of the critical reading section that is problematic is the actual reading of the passage. So when you're reading the passage, usually one of two things happens, and it's totally happened to me in the past, so I know exactly what's going on there. You're either reading it and it's so juicy that you totally zone out because it's actually really boring, and you forget everything that you read and end up having to go back to the beginning of the passage, reread it, maybe you're even zoning out for a second time, who knows, but it's not a good look. And at the end of the day, you end up getting to the questions having read the passage but not really understanding anything that you read. That's not where you want to be. The other type of reader that I've seen is the type who really dives into those materials and is reading for every single detail, and they're reading super slowly, taking notes, underlining everything, circling things, maybe even highlighting on their practice test. Who knows? But that's also not going to be great, because if you spend too much time reading the passage, you're going to get to the questions and have only a couple minutes to answer all of them. And we all know that that is not going to be possible. So you have to strike a perfect balance between that person who zones out and doesn't remember anything to the person who remembers everything that they're reading, which is way too much. So in general, the first thing that is super important to you is the italicized portion at the top of each passage. So on the test, you're going to have long passages, short passages, and double passages. The short passages, which really are like 1 or 2 paragraphs, probably won't have an italicized portion, but your long passage and your double passage will. And what the italicized portion is at the beginning of the passage is an introduction to what you're about to read. So it might tell you that this comes from a magazine article that was published in a certain time period, or it might tell you that it comes from a scientific journal, or it comes from a novel, but it normally gives you some background information about what type of passage you're reading and can clue you in as to the subject matter, the time period, the type of writing, and who the author may be. So that's really important. Never ever skip it, and it's usually pretty short. Then you get to the actual passage. And unlike most of the books that you're going to read, which you want to read in total, you're only going to want to skim these passages. The reason why I say that is because the SAT asks you specific questions. Many of the questions that they're going to ask you give you specific line references. So you don't really have to hone in on that whole paragraph in order to answer those questions, because they're going to tell you the specific lines you need to look at in order to answer those questions. What you want to get when you do your first read of the passage is to get an overview of what it's talking about. Is it argumentative? Is it a personal narrative? Is there two different arguments being made? What's the style of the writing, the tone, things of that nature? And in order to do that, you don't have to read details. Anytime a question is going to ask you about a detail, they'll give you the line reference. Also, they'll give you the line reference if they're asking you about a specific quote. So, when you're reading, in order to read for the important stuff, there are some words that are going to help out more than others. And this is going to require you to go back to the sentence completion discussion of triggers. And the trigger words, if you remember, are the words, phrases that are going to kind of give a sentence direction. Within a passage, they're going to give each paragraph a direction. So if all of a sudden you're reading a paragraph and you see a sentence start with despite, or however, or although, now you know that that second half of that paragraph is going to be contradictory to what you just read in the first paragraph. If you have a paragraph start with the word like yet, now you should automatically be clued in that that paragraph that you're about to read is probably contradictory to the one that you just read. So trigger words, whether they may be contradictory or similarity words, which if you see them are going to emphasize a re-emphasis of what you read previously in the paragraph, those are both going to lead you to sentences that are important and key to that paragraph. So when you're reading, you want to read for the triggers. Circle whatever trigger you get to, whether it's a big one like although and however, or a small one like but or and. Circle them, and then the sentence before and after are going to be super important to that paragraph. So make sure that you underline those sentences. In general, if you're a slow reader, you could probably just read the sentences surrounding the triggers and move on once you've gotten a little bit of a gist of what each paragraph is about. If you are a fast reader and you have time, you can definitely read on beyond those initial triggers. But it's definitely a technique that's going to keep you focused on the passage and not zoning out thinking about what you're going to have for lunch after you finish your SAT. Because I know that's what I was thinking about. So then, once you've read your passage and you've made your circles and you've underlined your important sentences, that's when we get to answering the question. Now, on the SAT, there's 3 types of questions. The first type of question is what we call an explicit question. Now, it's not like the explicit that you're thinking of. It's the explicit that means that they're asking for a specific piece of information that can be found directly in the passage. Most explicit questions are going to give you a line reference. I would say about 80 to 90% will. And anytime you're given a line reference, if you're not going back to that specific line and possibly the line before and after it, then you're really just putting yourself in a bad way, because they're throwing you the bone and telling you exactly where you can find the information. So if you're not using that really, really nice gift, then I don't know what to tell you, because that is super important. You've got to go back to the passage for that. The other time you want to go back to the passage is for the second type of question, which we call a vocabulary in context. Now, you've probably all heard of context clues. A context clue is when you're reading a sentence and have no idea what the vocabulary word is in the sentence, and you can glean the meaning or understand the meaning of that word just based on the words around it. That's what vocab in context is. However, what they do on the SAT is they'll ask you what the definition of a certain word is as it is used in a particular sentence. And what they do is they tend not to give you hard words. They usually are going to give you words that are super easy that you probably know. And the reason they do that is to tempt you not to go back to the passage. And that is the biggest mistake you can make on these questions, because I would say that 95% of the time on a vocab in context question, the most popular definition of the word they're asking about, which is definitely the definition that you know, is not going to be the correct answer. So if you're looking at this word and you're like, I know what that word means, I don't have to go back to the passage, it means A, and then you just move on, most likely you're getting that question wrong, because the meaning of that word in the context of that specific sentence is probably a really, really different meaning than the meaning that you know. So anytime you get a vocab in context question, 100% of those questions will give you a line reference, and you must go back. Now, the way that you're going to answer a vocab in context question is essentially the same exact way that you answer a sentence completion question. What you're going to do is you're going to take that word and read the sentence as if it were a blank. And then you're going to think about what word you would have put in that sentence, just the same way we make a prediction in sentence completions. And then once you know exactly what kind of word you're looking for, then you can go back to the answer choices and you can pick out which answer choice is closest in meaning to the meaning that you thought of. That's how you need to approach those, because if you just look at the most popular definition, you're guaranteed to get this question wrong.